3 people checked into room 15 at the Sportsman's Lodge Motel. Only 2 would walk out alive.
I think they're gonna kill me. No joke. So I was like, Aileen, run to the nearest gas station, go tell the person.
Call 911?
Yeah, run to I said, run, get out of there, go. She's like, I can't.
So this woman suffered before she died.
She suffered.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophie, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On April the 21st, 2018, surveillance cameras captured 3 people stumbling out of the Red Pirate restaurant in Apalachicola, Florida. They had just finished dinner and miniature golf, laughing and drinking as they made their way through this quiet coastal town. To anyone watching, they looked like typical tourists enjoying Florida's forgotten coast. But behind the smiles and carefree facade lay a web of jealousy, control, and violence that would soon explode into unimaginable brutality. The 3 people were Aileen Seiden, a 31-year-old property manager from Miami, and her 2 romantic partners, Zachary Abell and Christina Araujo. They were what some call a throuple, 3 people in a polyamorous relationship. But this wasn't a story of modern love. This was a ticking time bomb of manipulation and abuse that had been building for months. Aileen Seiden had not lived an easy life. She lost her mother to cancer when she was just 9 years old, and her father died of a heart attack when she was 14. These devastating losses forced her to grow up fast, developing an independence that would carry her through her teenage years and into adulthood. Her older sister Francesca became her legal guardian, but Aileen was determined to make her own way in the world. Francesca Seiden later said she worked as a property manager. She lived in a great apartment. You know, she paid her own rent, she made her bills. She was very independent. In 2016, Aileen visited Francesca in Los Angeles for an extended stay. It was a peaceful time for both sisters, and looking back, Francesca would wish her sister had never left. Because when Aileen returned to Miami, she reconnected with someone from her past, someone who would ultimately lead her down a path of destruction. Zachary Abell was a name from Aileen's high school days. Her best friend, who asked to be called Allie to protect her identity, remembered Aileen being uncertain about him at first. Allie said, "I'm not sure if he had the best reputation in high school." At first, she wasn't really sure about him. But despite her initial reservations, Aileen and Zach began secretly dating in 2016. There was just one problem. Zach was already in a long-term relationship with Christina Araujo. They had been together for 4 years and were business partners running a used car dealership called Abell Automotive. Christina wasn't just Zach's girlfriend. She was deeply embedded in his life in ways that made it nearly impossible for him to leave. Mike Picavey, a boat captain who became friends with Zach and Christina, witnessed their dynamic firsthand. He said, "If your relationship's not working, just end it and move on." But for Zach, it wasn't that simple. Picavey continued, "He tried so many times. He just didn't know how to. And then also, all the threats all the time that she could make him disappear. Every time she got drunk, she'd say some weird things." These weren't empty threats. Christina Araujo came from what she called police royalty. Her father was a major in the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department, and she never let anyone forget it. From the moment Picavey met her, she was bragging about her connections. Picavey recalled, "Right out of the gate, she said, 'Oh yeah, my dad's a major with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department, and if we ever get into any trouble with the law, he can take care of it.'" For months, Aileen remained Zach's secret. She hoped he would choose her over Christina, but he couldn't or wouldn't make that choice. Then in 2017, Aileen lost her job as a property manager. With nowhere else to turn, she began working at Abell Automotive, bringing her directly into Christina's world. It was then that Christina made a proposal that would seal all their fates. Instead of Zach choosing between them, why didn't the three of them just date each other? Aileen was reluctant at first, but eventually she agreed to the unconventional arrangement. What started as an attempt to solve their love triangle quickly became something much darker. Ali remembered. This whole dynamic started to change, where one of them always seemed to be the odd man out or was jealous, and at that point it just started to spiral out of control. The fighting began almost immediately. There were constant arguments, fueled by alcohol and jealousy. Physical altercations became routine, leaving both Aileen and Christina with black eyes and bruises. But according to those who knew them, the violence wasn't equal. Ali said that Zach was the main aggressor toward Aileen. She recalled, "Aileen would call me and would say, 'You have to come over here,' like he hurt me again. And I'd rush over there and photograph her and beg her to go to the police." But Aileen refused to go to authorities. She was terrified of Christina's threats and her family's law enforcement connections. Ali explained. The same answer was always that she came from police royalty, that she'd gotten away with everything in the past, and there was going to be no solutions to someone like Aileen getting hit. The abuse escalated to the point where Aileen ended up in the emergency room. Even then, she wouldn't tell doctors where her injuries came from. Ali, desperate to help her friend, started documenting the abuse with photographs. She warned Aileen repeatedly, "You have to break up with this guy. Someone's going to end up dead." But instead of leaving, Aileen moved in with Zach and Christina in 2018. The violence only got worse. Her sister Francesca grew increasingly worried, saying, "I wanted my sister out of the situation. I wanted her out." But like so many victims of domestic abuse, Aileen felt trapped. Everything changed in early April 2018. After a particularly violent fight between Zach and Christina, Aileen and Zach decided they had had enough. They packed up and left Miami together, heading west on what was supposed to be a fresh start, just the two of them. Their first stop was Dallas, Texas, where they stayed with a mutual friend. For 48 hours, they ignored the barrage of calls and texts from Christina. She sent over 150 angry, threatening messages, alternating between panic and rage. But Zach eventually responded, and in a decision that would prove fatal, he invited Christina to join them. She flew to Dallas within hours, and the toxic dynamic resumed immediately. The trio made their way back toward Florida, stopping in New Orleans. It was there that Aileen finally realized the full extent of her danger. She called Francesca in terror, telling her sister, "I think they're going to kill me." Francesca frantically told her, "Aileen, run to the nearest gas station. I said run, get out of there, go." But Aileen replied, "I can't." Secretly, Aileen and her best friend Ali devised an escape plan. Aileen would take a Greyhound bus from Tampa when they reached Florida, disappearing from Zach and Christina's lives forever. But Aileen would never make it to that bus. On April 21st, 2018, the trio arrived in Apalachicola, Florida. They went to the Red Pirate restaurant, played miniature golf, and decided to extend their trip by one more day. A local recommended the nearby Sportsman's Lodge Motel, and they reserved the last available room for the night. Room 15. But what Aileen didn't know was that this road trip, which had started as her chance for freedom, was about to become her tomb. The morning of April the 22nd, 2018, started like any other day of their trip. Surveillance footage shows all three of them at a local liquor store, stocking up on Fireball whiskey and vodka. They had decided to spend another day in Apalachicola before heading home to Miami. To the store clerk, they probably looked like tourists planning another day of fun in the sun. But the dynamics between the three had reached a breaking point. the road trip that was supposed to give Aileen and Zach space from Christina had only made things worse. Christina's rage over being left behind, combined with the realization that Zach and Aileen were planning to leave her permanently, had created a powder keg of emotions. Mike Picavet, who knew all three of them well, later said he had a bad feeling about the trip from the beginning. He told investigators, "I thought Aileen would end up dead there or something, because I didn't expect them to come back all together." Back at the Sportsman's Lodge Motel, the trio spent the day drinking heavily. The alcohol, which had always made their fights worse, began to work its destructive magic once again. By evening, the tensions that had been simmering throughout the trip finally boiled over. What happened next in room 15 would be disputed by the two survivors, each pointing the finger at the other. But the forensic evidence would tell a story of unimaginable brutality. According to Christina Araujo's later testimony, an argument broke out after hours of drinking. She claimed that Zach suddenly snapped and began attacking Aileen with his fists, punching her repeatedly and even biting her face. The violence, she said, was unlike anything she had ever seen. But Zach's version of events was entirely different. He would later claim that he woke up to find Christina standing over Aileen's dead body, having killed her while he slept. What isn't disputed is what the crime scene revealed. Room 15 became a chamber of horrors, with blood covering nearly every surface. The amount of blood was so extensive that even seasoned investigators were disturbed by what they found. Lead investigator Ronnie Jones later said, "She had bruises from head to toe covering her entire body. She suffered. I've never seen anything like it." The medical examiner would later determine that Aileen had been beaten so severely that nearly all of her ribs were broken. Her injuries were compared to those typically seen in motor vehicle crashes. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, chest, and abdomen, causing massive internal hemorrhaging. But the brutality didn't end with fists. According to Christina's testimony, Zach grabbed a shower curtain rod and used it to continue the assault, causing small circular bruises all over Aileen's body. Then he reached for his wooden walking stick, a piece of driftwood he carried with him, and used it to beat Aileen's back until the stick broke. In the most disturbing allegation, Christina claimed that Zach then sexually assaulted Aileen with the broken piece of wood. When Christina and Zach woke up the next morning, Aileen was dead. The woman who had survived losing both parents as a child, who had built an independent life for herself in Miami, who had trusted these two people with her heart and her life, was gone. But rather than call 911 or seek help, the two survivors made a horrifying decision. They wrapped Aileen's body in a sheet and carried her out of room 15. Surveillance cameras captured them leaving the motel, but only two figures could be seen walking to their car. What the cameras couldn't show was the bundle they carried between them, the lifeless form of the woman they had both claimed to love. They drove 6 miles to a deserted cul-de-sac off Highway 98 and dumped Aileen's body like garbage. Zach later testified about the callous way they disposed of her remains. He put his foot inside the vehicle and picked her up by her arm and her foot and swung her into the woods. After abandoning Aileen's body, they returned to room 15. The smell of vinegar that investigators would later detect told the story of their desperate attempt to clean up the crime scene. They wiped down surfaces, scrubbed at the blood, and tried to erase the evidence of what had happened. But blood has a way of revealing the truth, no matter how hard someone tries to hide it. When investigators later sprayed luminol in the bathroom, the entire room lit up like a Christmas tree, revealing bloodstains that no amount of cleaning could completely eliminate. The shower curtain rod they had used as a weapon still bore traces of Aileen's blood, along with a perfect palm print from Zach Abell's hand. The broken pieces of the walking stick were found both in the room and in their vehicle, with Aileen's DNA still clinging to the wood. As the sun rose on April the 23rd, 2018, Zach and Christina got in their car, and drove away from the Sportsman's Lodge Motel. They left behind a blood-soaked room and the shattered remains of 3 intertwined lives. But they couldn't escape what they had done. And within hours, their lies would begin to unravel. On that morning, a couple went fishing at a quiet pond off Highway 98 in East Point, Florida. It was supposed to be a peaceful morning on the water, but instead, they discovered something that would shatter the tranquility of Florida's forgotten coast forever. There, dumped at the end of a deserted cul-de-sac, was the battered body of a young woman. She had no identification, no purse, nothing to tell investigators who she was. For the moment, she was simply Jane Doe, a victim without a name. Lieutenant Ronnie Jones arrived at the scene and immediately knew they were dealing with something horrific. The woman's body was covered in bruises and lacerations. The level of violence was unlike anything he had seen in his years of law enforcement. Jones said, based on the coloration of the body, it was obvious the victim was deceased. She had bruises from head to toe covering her entire body. Within 24 hours, Jones received another call that would change everything. A housekeeper at the nearby Sportsman's Lodge Motel had discovered blood in one of the rooms. When investigators arrived at room 15, they were confronted with a scene that defied comprehension. Jones later recalled, "As soon as I came in, I noticed the bed. I mean, you couldn't miss it. The bed was covered and had bloodstains on it." The amount of blood told investigators that whoever had been in that room was almost certainly dead. But it was when they tested the bathroom with luminol that the true scope of the violence became clear. And most importantly, they connected the DNA from the motel room to the body found 6 miles away. The victim was identified as Aileen Seiden, and investigators learned that she had checked into room 15 with 2 other people, Zachary Abell and Christina Araujo. But by the time police began searching for them, the pair had already fled back to South Florida. Their destination was the home of Mike Picavet, Zach's friend and business acquaintance. When they showed up at his door around 9:30 a.m. on April 23rd, Picavet immediately asked the question that was weighing on his mind. "Where's Aileen?" Christina's response was immediate. "Oh, she ran away?" But Picavet didn't believe them. He pressed harder, demanding the truth. It was then that Zach broke down and admitted what they had done. Picavet recalled the moment. "I said, 'Where is she?' And Zach right away started to choke up, and he said, 'She's dead.'" According to Picavet, Zach claimed that Christina had killed Aileen while he was asleep and had convinced him not to call 911 when he found the body. Christina, for her part, told Picavet where they had dumped Aileen's remains, and he began searching for the location on Google Maps. But Picavet was terrified. He knew what these 2 people were capable of, and he feared for his own safety. He said, "I was worried for my safety then, from Christina. Well, I can't sleep in my house now. This is crazy. She could end up killing me." Despite his fear, Picavet knew what he had to do. He contacted Christina's father, Tony Araujo, who was a major in the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department. Tony Araujo, to his credit, immediately brought Picavet to the sheriff's office to make a formal statement. Later that day, Picavet was shown a photograph of the victim found on Highway 98. He confirmed what investigators already suspected. It was Aileen Seiden. With that identification, police descended on Picavet's home, where Zach and Christina were preparing to leave. They were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The forensic evidence against them was overwhelming, but even faced with this mountain of evidence, both Zach and Christina maintained their innocence and pointed fingers at each other. Their cases would take nearly 6 years to come to trial, dragging Aileen's family through years of agonizing legal proceedings. In 2023, Christina Araujo finally accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and agreed to testify against Zach in exchange for a 25-year sentence. She had already served about 5.5 years, so she would be eligible for release in her late 50s. Zachary Abell's trial began in January 2024, nearly 6 years after Aileen's murder. Christina took the stand and testified about the brutal beating she claimed to have witnessed. But Zach's defense attorney painted a different picture. He argued that Christina was the real killer, motivated by jealousy when Zach and Aileen tried to leave her behind. He pointed to the threatening text messages Christina had sent before joining them on the trip, including one that read, "You come near me, ho, I will kill you." The defense claimed that Zach's palm print on the shower curtain rod came from helping to clean up the crime scene, not from committing the murder. They argued that Christina had manipulated Zach into helping her cover up her crime. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury reached their verdict. The judge read the decision. In the case of the state of Florida versus Zachary Ray Abell, the defendant, is guilty of the lesser-included offense of second-degree murder. The jury had convicted Zach of the same charge that Christina had pleaded guilty to. They couldn't decide if he had actually intended to kill Aileen, but they were convinced he had participated in her death. On April 10, 2024, almost exactly 6 years after Aileen's murder, Judge Frank Allman sentenced Zachary Abell to life in prison without the possibility of parole.